a serious fire like they did in Arizona around our battery units. But that's definitely got to be a strong piece of the picture. We haven't really, as Austin Energy, ventured much into V2G, vehicle to grid, but that's obviously something that a lot of other folks are looking at in terms of being able to harness the battery storage. But again, I think there's legal constructs that don't exist around that need to exist. There's financial constructs around that need to exist, for that to be kind of a widely deployed framework that people are using to leverage that. Of course, if people are looking at 6 or 7, or I think Andre said $12 a gallon gas, they may look harder at their EV options than they may have done in the past. But as that fleet continues to grow, I think I read something, we hit 1 million vehicles, I think, for the first time. I forget if that was a California only number, if that was nationwide, but clearly the number of EVs continues to increase year over year. So you can get into something that becomes meaningful from a megawatt standpoint when you have a base out there that's large enough. Yeah. And like I said, the legal and financial constructs that allow you to make use of that.
Yeah, I would say, Greg, real quick, that I think the total number of installed EVs in the U.S. right now is about 1.5 million units. And I think that the expectation on 2022 is that there will be about 1 million EVs sold in America. So, it's an interesting number. It's starting to add up. I know that, for example, and I don't know the number, you may not know it either, but I think that there are probably more than 10,000 EVs in Austin already. And the number of registered vehicles in Austin is, I think, about 1 million vehicles. So, pretty soon it'll be 100,000. That would be 10% of the whole. Yep. So that's going to be an interesting number in terms of that. By the way, for those of you that don't know, Austin Energy a long time ago started a program for EV charging that I think is, as usual, revolutionary, first of its kind. So it's I think Austin Energy has about 1,000 EV charging stations, and they charge less than $5 all you can charge anywhere in those units. So pretty forward thinking in terms of helping the transition from gasoline to electric vehicles. And given that, Greg, what are your thoughts on managing all those assets going forward? When you think about networks and telecom, there seems to be a thinking that the utilities need to shift to private networks using broadband. We at Texas State have a test bed for members, hoping for you guys to join soon, to test private LTE and LoRaWAN and all kinds of technologies. We have 5 networks down there. What are your thoughts on, or what is the talk internally about? Do you guys see the need to owning private broadband capability to manage grid assets going forward? What's the thought there?
Yeah, we were, I think it's fun to share. We were approached a few years back by vendors looking to sell, basically be the intermediaries to acquire broadband. And at the time, with the executive leadership at the time, which there has been some change since then, and with the kind of the pitch that was put on the table at the time, Austin Energy declined to pursue that. I think that as time moves on, that changes. I think that Austin Energy has a very large outsourced agreement with Landis & Gyr for their meter infrastructure, where we're almost paying for a meter service, a meter data service from Landis & Gyr, and they're handling everything behind the head end. Everything from the head end to the meter is all LNG. So the thing that I'm wondering is, as we look at, we were talking a little bit a while ago about the challenge of, staffing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And shortage of workers and unfilled recs and things like that. And so you're faced with essentially kind of three options for what you do about that. One is to, continue to try to place FTEs. The second is to try to bring on contractors in a staff aug kind of fashion. And the third is managed service, right? And that's basically what we have with LNG right now is managed service.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wonder to what extent, as we continue, thinking back 30 years ago when I started, like everything was on-prem, everything was in-house. You might have the odd contractor here and there to do some stuff, but basically it was a solid FTE team up and down the chain. We're obviously in a very different place now, right? And so as I think about some of these things, is owning and operating broadband a core competency that a utility like Austin Energy has, or is that really a thing that a managed service would be able to provide, kind of better, more reliable service, better staffing, or at least fewer staffing headaches from the point of view of the utility? So that's kind of where my head is at with regard to those things. Is this a core competency that we should have as a utility, or are there other folks out there that can do it kind of better, faster, cheaper?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I think, Greg, the question is, how can you develop a business model around it? And given all of the data that you have about housing, all of the data that you have about the movement of people, and of course, when EVs come on, we will add that data also. So I think the point is, as going forward, then Austin Energy in its strategy would have to understand that there are new business models that's developing around the data that you collect. There are new algorithms that will be done. Certainly companies can come in and say that, give us the data and we can create you a new algorithm. My question is, in this fast moving world of technology, data collection, EVs, algorithms, are you guys prepared to enter that space?
So when I came into Austin Energy, one of the things that they put under the CTO function, which was somewhat unusual, was corporate strategy, which normally is like there's a VP of corporate strategy, right? But at Austin Energy, they had assigned that kind of development and management of the corporate strategic plan to the CTO. So as I began to work in that, one of the things that came up was, are there new business models? What new business models should we engage in? And this is where I came to better understand some of the differences between a municipal utility like Austin Energy, specifically in Austin, and a investor-owned utility, which is where I spent the prior 25 years of my life, right? And there's essentially, from a kind of boundaries standpoint, we are as a department of the city of Austin not intended to engage in business models that would basically compete with private sector offerings, essentially. Well, that takes a lot of business models off the table. So as I developed a bunch of business models before really kind of understanding this limitation, and then started to discuss these with executive management, and then found out this limitation that we've got. So it makes it challenging to get into some of these things. So for example, there are broadband providers. So in terms of many utilities, right, especially investor-owned utilities, can get into the broadband business since they've already got a lot of infrastructure built out all over the place. That's that can be an attractive business model for those utilities. But since there are competitive offerings in the private space, that's not where we go to.
Absolutely. So, let me add one more thing there. I think that as cities begin to sit on platforms and not necessarily just dirt and buildings, and as platforms begin to interact with each other, then that model will have to be adjusted in the future. As a professor at the University of Texas, we cannot compete with private enterprise as a state entity. As the data develops, and as you look at smart cities, as you look at the new ways smart cities can make revenue for themselves, I think that's one of the things that would change tremendously in the future. And I think there would be a public-private partnership with your data and private enterprise to do that.
Yeah, it's possible. We, for example, have been approached several times actually by the Autonomy Institute to develop out essentially the autonomous infrastructure for using Austin as a test bed. And again, we run into some some limitations.
Oh, I understand. I understand exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. So, again, if we had kind of full freedom of movement, like a private organization would have, for example, I think we'd be moving, pretty heavily into some of that stuff because it seems to have a huge upside. But even if we're just purely as a electric utility engaged with some of this stuff, some of these poles, towers, there's a term for it which is evading me right now, but building out that infrastructure, basically putting one of these 20, 25 foot structures on basically every street corner in the city to get like a full mesh that would allow you to use it. That's an enormous, especially for something that's a city the size of Austin, an enormous undertaking. Each one of those new structures needs to be connected into the electrical network, which, that alone, the trenching. I mean, these are very pedestrian things. I understand. This is kind of a very, high-minded group that we have on the call right here. But these pedestrian concerns end up being enormous in terms of work effort and cost. Not to mention, it's either 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more load that these towers represent relative to a street light, for example, which would be our closest analogy to a electrical device that's kind of spread throughout the city on a fairly even basis. So that's got its own, if we talk about, you were mentioning earlier, John, about how are we dealing with growth and so forth, that would be significant. The electrical load growth in a way that is different from the increasingly energy efficient, residences, for example, that we see sprouting up all over the Austin area. So there are a number of very serious, even if we're just treating it purely from an electrical utility standpoint, a number of very serious implications of developing that kind of infrastructure across a large swath of the city.
So if I may elaborate real quick, so the Autonomy Institute is a member of Texas State CIEDAR, and we're very excited to be working with them on working with all the municipalities that are a member, San Marcos, Kyle, Buda, Round Rock, all the way to Brownsville, on how this device, they call it the PIN, Public Infrastructure Network Node, comes about. Who owns it, what technology is in there. I mean, there's all kinds of challenges, right, Greg? I think it makes a lot of sense in many ways, that autonomy will need to happen in a way where the network that talks to the autonomous devices is separate from the network that we all tweet and Facebook on, because we need something that is robust and safe, right? But it's really interesting. Anyway, and one of the things that I wanted to ask Greg was related to, again, Austin Energy. So I find it refreshing and actually exciting, and maybe this came from you influencing the job title, because your position is kind of new as a job title versus your predecessor, is that you have the title of technology and data. And we talk a lot about in this program that data is the new oil, and that data is where the harnessing of innovation and improvements and efficiency will happen. Can you share a little bit about the focus of data at Austin Energy, and maybe one or two examples, if anything, that you can share on how you are focusing on data as a competitive advantage, as an improvement of the business, as something to help reduce the price for customers? How are you leveraging data?
Okay, so when I first came on as CTO in 2016, and we were just launching the strategic plan, and we had a number of strategic initiatives. One of the strategic initiatives was actually called Data and Analytics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a response to a understood challenge we had as a utility to harness the value of the data that we had. And those challenges spanned across a wide variety of areas. We first of all had very convoluted and very siloed approaches to management of the data. So if you came to me, for example, Andres, and I own some data, and I just happen to like you, then I would give you access to the data. If Llewelyn came to me and we had a fight before, I would just say no to him, and that would be kind of the end of it. So that was obviously not supportable, right, as a model. So got all the groups together and agreed as a overall organization, in the future, when people ask for information and access to data, this is how we will do it. So we got that agreement, got that ironed out, and that was good.
Mm-hmm.
Second challenge we had was people didn't know what data was there. So they would go out and try to find sources of data, not knowing that we maybe even already had the data in-house, because there's a lot of data, as you well know, that flows through an electric utility. We're no exception. There's tons of it. So we now have a touch point people can go to find out, like, do we already have this thing, or is this a new thing we need to acquire? And if we do have it, like, how do I get to it? What's the whys and wherefores? We have a number of, I call them Sherpas, but they're, kind of guides. Like, you just need to know the name of this person. They will take you through the rest of the process, because people can never understand technology processes. They can never understand data processes, but they can remember a name. So if you remember this one name, they will guide you through all the rest of it. That's all you got to know.
That's good.
Yeah. So that was the second challenge, was getting people to know, like, what's available. The third challenge was proliferation of tools. So we had, when I first got to Austin Energy as Chief Technology Officer, the first question I had was, what technologies do we have, right? Very natural question.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody could really answer that in any kind of comprehensive way. I got this old 4-year-old spreadsheet with some stuff on it, half of which was wrong or out of date, and began to just kind of look under items and see what's there. And it turned out we had about 1,300 technologies running the organization. So 42 of those technologies were data and analytics platforms, each of which normally had usage and support that went one deep. So the other challenge that we said was, okay, this is madness. We need to define, like, what is our corporate standard for data and analytics tools? Let's develop out a actual support team for that. Let's provide training. Let's have user groups come together and explain what they're doing with this. So we put that together. We ended up landing on Tableau. It was between Tableau and Power BI. We had to bake off. We decided with that. And went forth with that. That's been very helpful. That alone has been very helpful, because then people have a common platform. We have a Tableau servers as well. So there's a common platform. People can actually put their analyses. Whereas before we had file folders, I guess,
Right.
that's where we would put stuff. And we have adequate from a security standpoint as well around all that different, all those different analyses. So that's been a pretty big game changer. And let me just mention the last. So there are 4 pillars.
Mm-hmm.
Getting access. What do we have? What tool do we use? The last one was culture of analytics, which is in some ways the most important one, which is trying to move us culturally from, this is how we've always done it, this is what I've done for 20 years, this is what my gut tells me, to actual data-driven decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So getting examples out there in front of folks around this is what this group does in terms of understanding like how things are going, right? Would you like something like that? If so, guess what? We have a support team that can actually help you get down that path, you know, to developing, honestly, just basic situational awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've never had. So
That's huge, Greg. That's huge.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Good job.
I'd like to, Greg, I'd like to circle back to what you were saying about revenue, in which you predicted that you could absorb growth through without, in fact, having to produce any more power through DER and other conservation. But that has a limit. I mean, that can't go on forever. And Andres on this program has suggested that in time, Texas demand on power will increase threefold as we electrify transportation. So you have to be calculating some of that in. So if you have 2% now, you may be able to absorb it for 1, 2, 3 years, perhaps, out of conservation. But it's hard for me to imagine that you could continue much longer. The other question I have has to do with the cost of fuel in this volatile world where oil is very expensive, and historically gas has always gone up when oil has gone up, and as we're also a gas exporting country, that is a reasonable thing. I went through the energy crisis of 73 through basically 90, and the price of gas followed oil up, as did the price, believe it or not, of coal followed oil and crashed almost in tandem. So we're looking at a very disturbed future, and even with good power purchase contracts, those don't last forever. Or if the supplier is being squeezed, they may claim force majeure and seek to break the contract, as we saw last time around. So how are you looking at that? How are you buttressed against that disturbed future?
Well, you know, I don't have the exact numbers here, but I think it is over 50% of our generation is at this point renewables. So, or actually carbon free. So that includes a nuclear component as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, those tend to be less volatile with regard to the very strong connectivity between oil, gas, and coal, for example. So if we continue to decarbonize, move away from those, you know, kind of fossil fuels, as we continue to extend renewables, as we solve for the energy storage, the massive energy storage problem, some of those shocks become less and less impactful, at least in terms of utilities. And certainly with greater and greater electrification of our transportation in the U.S., that may, you know, also lessen the overall societal impact of, you know, some of these fossil fuel price shocks that occur from time to time. So I guess in terms of a direction, not only is it, you know, kind of cleaner and just generally better, you know, for the planet, but it may also have a kind of an ancillary effect of lessening our susceptibility and vulnerability to these significant price shocks that, you know, as you're saying, you know, in 73, before 73, the price of, you know, a gallon of gas was, you know, completely unrecognizable to anybody who has been born in recent years.
And they gave you a plate when you bought it.
Yeah, and you know, checked your oil and cleaned your windshield too. So, you know, a lot of changes there.
Well, Greg, let me ask you this. As you move around town, given a crisis, I mean, do you hide the fact that you work for Austin Energy, or has your prestige gone up? Or do people want to shoot you? Or what has happened in terms of the environment where you work? Is the prestige higher? Do you get a lot of questions about what's going on? And this would be very, very unusual for you. But how was that reaction for the people who actually was responsible for not keeping the lights on, but the lights going off?
Well, I think that, you know, the answer to that question probably varies greatly according to your actual role at the utility. If you were one of our line workers, for example, if you were a line worker and you were out there working on stuff in the middle of Uri,
Right.
people were bringing you soup. I mean,
Absolutely.
You were
overtime. I did that.
You were a hero. Yeah, I mean, you were just, I mean, at a very emotional level, like you were people's hero.
Right.
I think to the extent that we've improved our ability to communicate with customers about expected times of restoration, things like that, I think that has helped immeasurably. Actually, we've got in place now a portal into information coming out of our advanced distribution management system, which both customer care folks are able to use, as well as people in the field, where their field clients are able to use, that they said was a complete game changer over prior experience. You just had better information. So if somebody asked you about something, you actually had an answer. You didn't have, I don't know, I'll get back to you, right? Or we're not sure, we'll see. We had some actual data again, which was behind the answers that we could give to customers. So that was a new thing. Obviously, people were unhappy about having their power cut off for extended periods of time. Mine was, as well as other people's. What I find usually people want to know is, like, so from the inside, like, what really happened? What was really going on, there? And that's where I think many of us can take the opportunity to share, like, okay, so let's explain about, like, down transmission lines because of ice, and how we were, and down distribution lines because of ice, and how that was essentially kind of getting wrapped up. I mean, we were meeting like every hour around the clock throughout an entire episode, and getting status. So that's one thing, that I share, is that from an infrastructure standpoint, from an electrical grid standpoint, that was actually in pretty good shape at the time that the severe ERCOT mandates came through. And I said, you plan for a certain amount of load shed mandate from the Central Market Authority, but the levels that we had gotten to were just kind of, at least in my experience here in the last 5 years, unprecedented. And the length of time that they lasted was also unprecedented. Which also led into the price mechanisms which were all built for, like, 15-minute $9,000 prices. Well, they're not built for week-long $9,000 prices. So that screwed everything else up, as well. So I use that opportunity to help people discriminate in their minds between power outage due to equipment failure and power outage due to kind of larger issues with the ERCOT grid. And I tell them, it's like, it doesn't matter what weatherization stuff we put in place, what other measures we take. If we get an order from ERCOT to drop that amount of load shed, we're going to do that. That's what we're mandated, as part of ERCOT. You don't have a choice. You drop the load. And luckily we weren't, cutting into our, what we call our CL1 load, right? Hospitals and things like that. I mean, those are kind of the people that are kept on last. But if the cuts had gone deep enough, if the mandate had gone high enough, they would have been the next to be on the chopping block. And the other thing I share that I don't think many people are aware of is, we would be on these calls, and there'd be guys in the control room. I'm getting chills right now, actually, even just thinking about this. These are the guys that actually have to flip that switch.
Mm-hmm.
What they know is going to shut down power, possibly for hours, maybe for days, for thousands of people. They're the ones who actually hit the switch.
Do you think that should be automated, Greg?
No, it wouldn't really matter, because somebody would have to make the decision about how to program that algorithm to shut it off. But my point to folks that I talk to is the emotion that was coming through, even the phone calls of the people who actually had to flip that switch, was intense. These were very, very intense times. And they knew that as a human being, they were going to be significantly affecting the lives of other human beings. And they did not take that lightly. They took it very seriously. They took it very, very deeply seriously. And I think that that's maybe a misperception that some folks have about the utility industry, is that, you know, somehow it is all just like run by machines and so forth. It's like, no, there's human judgment that's coming into play, and people are making decisions about impacts on other people's lives. And it's very personal. It's very personal. It's very emotional. And I think that that's not, people don't think about that.
Yeah.
But I would tell you that those guys were in pain. Those guys in the control room were in pain, doing what they had to do to keep the grid alive.
Yeah, I say to everybody listening that the grid behaved as it was meant to behave. There are some flaws in the technology of the grid for historical reasons that are getting fixed, and there were some flaws in the financial system and the settlement and the pricing and all that took place afterwards, the aftermath. But, you know, we didn't have a blackout. You know, the ERCOT did not go down, which would have been even more devastating. And the utilities did their job. And could it be done better? Could it been better? Sure, there's always room for improvement, right? But I think that all in all, you know, we never get New England weather in Texas. And that was, I lived in New England. Let me tell you, that would have been a mega storm in New England. So, I think that, you know, there were some losses and, you know, unfortunate things, and a lot of people that peril in the storm, unfortunately. But all in all, I think that Texas fared better than most people think it could have fared, primarily because the grid in Texas is fairly sophisticated. I got a few questions to ask you, Grid. Hopefully you can stay a little longer beyond the hour. I got some rapid fire questions to get your take and thoughts on what's going on and what's impacting Austin Energy. So a lot of people are enamored with cryptocurrencies, crypto mining. Is that happening at Austin Energy? Do we have crypto mining customers in Austin? Is that a problem for the grid? What's our thoughts on that?
Yeah, it comes up as a topic from time to time. I don't think the penetration of crypto has gotten, you know, kind of to the point where it's on the scale of, like, you know, large C&I customers, for example. You know,
Right.
they're not whoever they are. They're not Samsung, right?
Right.
So,
but are they flocking into Austin Energy? Do you have a list of customers pending, people applying to be crypto miners? Is that how it goes, kind of thing?
I don't know the exact number of people who are kind of self-identifying as crypto folks. They could just be identifying themselves as data center folks, which is, you know, basically
Similar.
what they are.
Right.
Very similar, right? Similar low profile. So I don't know how many people are actually self-identifying as crypto miners that are applying for connection.
Yeah. And another quick question. So you know, you and I have talked about this in many times since we've known each other for a long time. But DER, distributed energy resources, is finally happening. EVs are the most prominent example of that. And you know, we talked about how many electric vehicles in Austin and the like, and growing dramatically, and the utilities encourage them to grow. What's your thought? What is the thinking right now about planning for that world of, you know, 500,000 EVs, charging with the grid, balancing the grid? Where's the thinking about how do we model that? How do we prepare for that? Where's the thought process?
I know on the system side, we're trying to figure out, like, how do we manage this from a system standpoint. So, you know, as you mentioned, we put in place the Shines project, which helped us to model some of these things, not only from so there's two sides of the coin, as you're well aware. There's the financial side, and there's the grid security side. And you know, like the ADMS manufacturer, Schneider, has DERMS functionality that's built into the platform that's kind of developing greater and greater functionality over time. I think at first some of these things were kind of DERMS in name only, but they are acquiring greater and greater sophistication from a grid security side, from a kind of dispatchability side and so forth. The piece I think is missing from that side of the puzzle is the financials, right, for the market, putting market into it, which I think that the DERO, the DER optimization engine that was built by Doosan in conjunction with Austin Energy, that was part of the Shines project, that tried to look at both what does the grid need right now, as well as what is the optimal thing to do from a financial standpoint right now. And I haven't seen commercial offerings out there that are combining those two things together, both the financials and the physicals together in one kind of optimization package.
Right.
So, but I think that's a key piece of it, because the two have to kind of be put together from an energy storage standpoint.
Absolutely. So given that, I'm also curious about something when it comes to billing. So Austin Energy has had smart meters since forever, 2003, and on and on. I don't believe that other than commercial and industrial customers, that Austin Energy offers time of use pricing. What's the thinking about time of use pricing, terms, demand? Where's the thinking about the billing side of that equation in terms of any kind of real-time pricing TOU?
My understanding of that area is that the kind of focus groups and studies that have been done around that don't indicate one of two things. One, that the demand for time of use is not really there. And second, that even if it is there, that time of use doesn't really influence behavior to the extent that people think it's going to influence behavior. So they get the time of use, but they don't really, significantly modify their lifestyle to take best advantage of that time of use rate. So, I think in terms of people's overall cost of living, their electric bill is just like their electric bill. I think they're far more concerned, for example, about, let's say, their water bill, at least in Austin, than they might be concerned about their electric bill. So that's where that's going to go, because it comes up as a perennial topic every year, right? There's discussion about time of use. Yeah. There's never been, to date anyway, enough of impetus from the customer or the account management side to really make it go of it. The other thing, which we don't really, haven't really talked much about, is the challenge. We have Oracle CC&B, other people use SAP CCS. Both are, they're built for high volume billing of consumption, right? That's what they do. They do it really well and very reliably. Having them do any other thing is really, really painful and expensive and takes a long time, basically. So, in that space, I'm looking at up and comers like the Salesforce Velocity product, for example, really giving more of a 360-degree view of the customer, and trying to maybe identify those customers where a time of use or any other program, might be interesting. So while the person is on the phone talking about, their bill, that's mainly what they call about, is the bill. You could be kind of selling them on alternative services that you might offer as a utility. But the pain involved with doing that with the duopoly of SAP and Oracle is painful.
Right. Another quick question. So Austin Energy was probably the #1 utility in the nation back when I was there, when Roger Duncan came to my office and said, I want to do conservation. I want to manage the thermostats in homes. So we started doing that. And when I left, we were managing 100,000 thermostats. I don't know how many we manage now, but the virtual power plant, that optimization, bolted into the generation side. Where is the thinking of that at Austin Energy? Is there a virtual power plant being masterminded at Austin Energy?
Yeah, it's we did maybe 3-4 years ago, we had kind of 6 parallel systems to do kind of demand side management, which included like the thermostat program and some other programs we had. But it's like every program we had its own platform.
Right.
So we brought the number down. We didn't get to 1, but I think we got from maybe 6 down to 3 as a process, in terms of that process. Ultimately, though, I think the direction we'd like to get to is where that becomes a, essentially like a dispatchable resource available to our energy market operations group that would be able to use that as easily as they do any other kind of dispatchable resource. So that's ultimately where we'd like to try to go, is either, with the remaining however many systems we've got, we have some sort of a kind of abstraction layer that can bring all that into our energy market area, so they can more effectively use that resource. They use some of that resource today, and in some cases the resource is not automatically dispatchable. You need to actually have a phone conversation with some people to do some things at the customer site. But long term, that would be the direction, is to have that fully automated and fully baked into our other generation dispatch.
Thank you, guys. John?
I think that the biggest change in the future would be EVs and data and how to manage the data. And also remember that these public-private relationships, when we started a new business model with the Austin Technology Incubator and created all the wealth and created all the companies, universities were not supposed to do these things, but those things happen. So good luck in the future, and I wish you well.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Llewelyn, any final questions?
A final question. At the beginning, Greg, you talked about cybersecurity keeping you awake at night. I wonder, where do you look for guidance on your own practices? Is it to NERC? Is it to the federal government? And what do you think about the NERC guidelines, for example?
I think we comply with them. No, I mean,
I know them much criticized. I am on the phone almost every day with somebody who is criticizing the NERC guidelines as inadequate, or NERC is unapproachable, or is insensitive. In fact, just yesterday I was talking to a professor who had advised NERC and had a lot of complaints about the rigidity of its systems for acquiring information, which is disturbing.
A lot of these frameworks, I include NERC-CIP, with those frameworks are built off the same common principles of what I call just kind of general cyber hygiene. They're just kind of good practices to do, whether you're within the NERC-CIP, the electronic security perimeter or physical security perimeter or not. They're just things that you should be doing generally in the organization. And they're the NIST standards, which are another flavor of that, and various other frameworks that are kind of similar. They're all trying to go towards good basic hygiene of your systems and how you manage things and manage access and so forth. I think that one of the things that is challenging, at least from my perspective, is how to reconcile kind of a cloud future with some of the NERC-CIP standards with regard to your physical security perimeters and electronic security perimeters, things like that, with cloud-based systems. In my mind, I haven't completely figured out how that all reconciles, but until it does, I think Austin Energy, like many utilities, just maintains everything on-prem, inside of a fence, inside of the buildings that they own, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that'll be one area where there'll have to be some, I think, investigation in terms of how we reconcile that with cloud systems.
Right. Well, Greg, you've been very kind. Thank you for spending the time with us today. I'm always excited to reconnect with Austin Energy and see that the journey is moving forward. and I think you're going to be doing a fabulous job for the years to come. Look forward to visiting with you again and having you over at Digital 360 Summit, and maybe convincing you to join Texas State CIEDAR and deal with the pins and all kinds of other things we're working on. Thank you for being with us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. Very interesting.
Good job. Well done. Johnny, do you have the guitar? Send us away.
I'll send you away. I'll send you away. In the early morning rain, with $1 in my hand, with an aching in my heart, and my pockets full of sand. I'm a long way from home, and I miss my loved one so. I'm in the early morning rain, no place to go.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny, very much.
Okay.
Woo. We're done.
Bye, everybody.